Hey everyone, uh, thank you for coming to our first and last for the year live data chat. Uh, this is Kevin and David always schools me in our one-on-ones when it comes to data. So we decided to, hey, why not, try doing it in public for once? But let's just jump right in. The goal is to answer the question why you should evaluate data observability in 2023. So to start it off, David, who are you?
Hi, I'm David. I'm head of data at Metaplane. What does that mean? Metaplane being a data software company. So I do some data engineering work, but I often do some things like DevRel, product management, content, just being part of the community, meeting people, speaking to them about data problems, and some of you may have spoken to me recently. So it's kind of a wide ranging role, but yes, a lot of fun.
And where were you before Metaplane? Like, what's your journey been like?
So I've been a data practitioner for 12 years until January of this year. And then I went on a bit of a wild ride through startup world, being a VP of data at a startup, then moving to be a co-founder, and then from there, and the funding environment being what it was, that's how I ended up at Metaplane.
And so lucky to work with you. Uh, and so in the past, like in your 12 years as a data practitioner and leader, uh, what kinds of roles were you in and what kinds of companies did you work in?
So I've been in like your traditional like head of BI and analytics type roles, senior director of data. So I've been in a few of those types of roles. But then I've also had some kind of specialist type roles where I had like a really long title once, just like head of portfolio pricing for e-commerce. But that was really like there was still it's just a commercial analytics role, really. Um, and then I've had roles like very specific to the industry, like so in payments, I've had roles like scheme fees manager and things like that. But again, they're heavily analytics engineering roles, I'd say.
Got it. And in those roles, when despite a long job title is like leader of an analytics function, how did you think about goal setting?
So actually, it was much easier when it was a commercial role because you were there to be that someone who gave assists to that sales team or account management team. And it was very straightforward. Like you knew what you were trying to do. You were trying to grow the business 20% this year. How can we help the sales and account management team achieve that? Now, and given where we were sitting in the organization, we were meant to achieve that through repricing or changing the structure of our pricing or cross sell, upsell. So we knew what to do and the tools we had available to us. And so we looked in the data, we figured out what could we do, what was worth the most, what was the least risky, and then kind of made that kind of scoring matrix of this is the thing we should definitely do this year to help get us there. What's harder though is actually in a more traditional data lead role because you don't have those kind of targets. I had financial targets in this commercial analytics role, which makes it in some ways it kind of focuses the mind. Whereas in the traditional data lead role, I think prioritization can be a bit more difficult because you're looking after often things which are infrastructure. You also have all kinds of different requests coming in, and then you also have the things that you think are valuable. So it's actually really, really hard because the infrastructure stuff needs to be done to a certain level, otherwise everything else suffers. And your stakeholders just pretty much don't care or know about that unless they're the CTO. And usually they're a supporter rather than like a true stakeholder. Um, and the stakeholders, they all think that their thing is important. Like, and you have to be, this is where you kind of have to be ruthless about trying to like evaluate, how likely do you think that they'll be able to use this piece of work to do something good for the business? How much is that thing worth? And then you start stack ranking, and then you put your own stuff in there as well. Yeah, it's pretty tough actually as a data leader to prioritize.
Got it. And when you say we in these settings, like who is we in this case? Like which org did you roll up to? Who did you work with to establish these goals?
So I've either rolled up to finance or engineering. So typically, as you might expect, it's a bit easier to prioritize infrastructure work when you work for engineering. uh, and it's harder to do that when you're in finance to an extent, although they're not bad. And it's easier to prioritize high value, commercial work and finance.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's
And
fairly logical.
yeah, and what was the cadence for setting these goals?
So I what I by the end of my time there in those types of roles, what I try to do is to we'd have like the big tick cadence, which was with the company. So the company would set its OKRs. And so then we'd set what we wanted to do to support those proactively at the same time. And that really helped because then you're not just waiting for requests, although that would still happen related to those OKRs. You were already trying to be prepared and to help with those. But then we'd have like the little tick, which was like every week, every 2 weeks, what are we working on? Making sure the priority still stacks up right, and that we're not unblocked, etc. So like that, I think that's the way I'd look at it.
Got it. Aaron and hi, Aaron. Whose value ranking is the right value ranking for prioritization?
So I'd say it's no person's. It's what's best for the business as a whole, right? And that's quite an abstract thing. Um, it's and that's why it's hard because you're trying to measure what you think will the ex which item on this list has the highest expectation of delivering something good for the business. And there's all these considerations about sure it might be worth a lot, but can we actually deliver the output from it this year or next year? And is it going to help us hit our goals this year? And you make some horrible choices sometimes where you throw aside work that's really great, really interesting, and is valuable because the business won't see the rewards of it this year or even next year. So then you prioritize things where you'll get the benefit sooner. But I think that's the job.
Make tough decisions, communicate
Yeah.
difficult. Definitely. And as we're approaching the end of the year, many leaders like yourself are probably, wrapping up or starting to think about next year. And specifically when it comes to data quality, how do you think about that as a goal?
So I do kind of see data quality as like an infrastructure goal because this is how, as a data team, which will include data engineers, analytics engineers, and also as a company who relies on data and has product engineers producing that data, uh, you know, we need that data quality as part of our like infrastructure rigor in order to deliver every other possible thing that we want to do in data. It's like a absolute force multiplier. Is if you have data you can trust in and you're not second guessing yourself, you're not having to fix. It's so worth doing, and it just makes your team so much more effective. So I think data quality has and should always be the priority, should always be a huge priority, because if you don't have it, you can't do the rest of the data work. Now, having said that, there's nuance. And I think people have tried to kind of boil the sea and build these data lakes where everything is high quality, and they've ended up with nothing being high quality. And you have these data swamps, right? I'm just waiting for like a Joe Reese comment on this. um, and I think it's then about it's again, you get this prioritization, like what's the important data, what's the source for the gold data that our business uses for decision making and other important processes. And you suddenly start thinking, well, I really want to apply my rigor and data quality there more heavily, like 10 to 100 times more heavily than anywhere else. So I think that's when we then start thinking, well, this data is in the critical path. It's either going up to some like executive deck where they're making decisions on a weekly basis, feeding some machine learning model that then is making automated decisions for the business. And so this data is in production. And when something's in production and it's not in some like random dashboard that not everyone looks at, you think about that data differently, and you think about, well, we need to have testing for this data. We need to be monitoring this data. And I think that's where data observability comes in, because I think when you think about how you look after that production data, yes, you should definitely test it 100%, but you should also have monitoring and observability in place to check for things that you're not checking, that you couldn't possibly think to write a test for, or that would be far too complicated to write a test for.
Got it. Something that stood out from what you were saying to me is how obvious it is. Like, okay, if data is in the critical path, especially tied to the top or bottom line of the business, like you're saying, like you should test it. It should be high confidence. And how did you arrive at that belief?
I think it's about consumption. So, you can see like through metadata, this dashboard is used a lot, or this dashboard is used by your exec team. And you can start seeing that these certain assets are worth more to your business than others. Or you can see, oh, this model or this DBT model is being used as an input to a feature store that feeds our credit risk scoring model, right? For a credit company, that would be extremely critical and probably highly governed.
Mm-hmm. Right. But did this differ between the e-commerce companies that you've worked for and the non-e-commerce companies, where you described like, okay, sometimes the data is so clearly tied to financial metrics, other times it's not. Did you see a difference?
Yes. So yeah, sometimes like in the fintech space, like some of it was like regulatory, some of it was like understanding your cost model properly, and so it wasn't. It was still very commercially valuable, but it was like indirectly so. Yeah, that's the way I describe it. And in the e-commerce businesses, it's much more focused on how do we make decisions to make money more effectively? How do we optimize anything? That's the key point.
That makes a lot of sense, and something that we see a lot when we
Yeah.
work with companies as well. Uh, Adam asks, how about setting quality thresholds for each asset, or, for example, for the important ones that you found out through, for example, metadata?
And I think this is about SLAs, right? And this is again how we start thinking about production data. So if this asset is so important, and it doesn't matter, like Adam also goes on to talk about usage, right? So it doesn't matter if something's not used very much, if we also then set SLAs to say, no, this is like a regulatory dashboard that we need to be correct. It doesn't matter if no one looks at it because it only outputs regulatory data. It just needs to be perfect. And so you set the SLAs of this much variance from like some other source. Like it could be like a bank account. It could be something to validate the data against, and it could have also freshness SLAs and different things about even individual fields. And I think that's how you go about it, which is, again, treading the path of software engineering, which is, I don't think we should copy it exactly necessarily, but we can adapt a lot of it because they've had to deal with production stuff for a long time.
For sure. Right. I love that line, right? Not a one-to-one copy. We can definitely get inspiration.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering now that, like, should you add data observability to your list of, yearly prios? And maybe more pointedly, why shouldn't you?
So I would say if you have data in production, yes, you should be. Because, and I've had people tell me, well, I'm using DPC tests, I'm using great expectations. Why isn't that enough? Or isn't that the way to do it? And you definitely should be using those things, definitely. And you shouldn't only use observability, and you shouldn't use observability on Boolean outcomes. So when I say a Boolean outcome, it's like this column should always be unique. This column should never be null. That's not really a great use case for observability. Fundamentally, observability learns automatically from prior behavior. And so if you've got in like strange behavior where Boolean truths are not always true, it will learn from that and accept deviance which you wouldn't want to accept. Observability is great where it's a gray issue. It's not black and white. The typical one I always talk about is this foreign key is null 8 to 12% of the time, but it depends on whether it's Tuesday or Christmas, right? That's where you want that algorithm to be there, learning from seasonality, learning from year-on-year growth, and having like a threshold for white noise, and it being able to prevent you from having to write so many possible tests that would then be out of date almost as soon as you wrote them. So I think it's those two things going hand in hand. You want the tests for the Boolean outcomes because there are so many things about your business data that should always be true. But then you should also have observability for those cases where you need to be protected from silent data issues coming in to affect you.
And those silent data bugs, as we know, can be a killer. Uh, how, how do you stack rank data observability against other priorities, though? Like, for example, many leaders today are thinking about cutting costs in the current economic condition, or hiring, specifically like onboarding new team members or retaining team members, uh, or even getting data into prod in the first place. Like, how does data observability fit in against those or more priorities you might have had to balance in the past?
So I feel like data observability has to pay its way, right? So it has to be saving your team time, either in detecting problems and therefore protecting the data team from having trust issues, from stakeholders finding data issues, and then data issues persisting for a long time while they fix them. So it's got to reduce that time from discovery of issue to solution of issue. And if it's doing that, it will be paying its way in all likelihood, because that work, it costs you in engineering time, distracts the engineers from whatever else you wanted them to actually build that was probably something new or some kind of refactoring work. And as well, it protects the trust and the value of the data that you have. So it should be paying its way, and it should be something that's almost like a no-brainer. I want to be told about these issues, and I want to save time writing tests. I want to save time from having alert fatigue from writing way too many tests. Yeah, I think it needs to pay its way.
For sure. And Aaron makes a great point that testing is beeps and boops are not enough. Uh, totally agree with that. A lot of data quality issues require input from end users and consumers to fix the issue, or and many times even identify that it is an issue at all. Uh, Great call out, and I think data observability tools are only starting to scratch the surface there. Uh,
Yeah, and I agree with
David,
that because it's never going to solve the problem. What it's doing is it's showing you and helping you get to see the problem faster, get to the root cause of that problem faster, and then a human has fundamentally at this point in time, a human still has to come in and decide how to resolve that problem or whether it's a problem at all. I still foresee that being the case for a few years to come.
until Chat GPT comes in. No, we're safe here. Everyone in this stream is safe. We just need to. So for the second part of this, like, why shouldn't you
So
prioritize data observability right now?
number one, if you don't have any data in production, don't put data observability on it. It's just noise and it's cost. Why would you do it? And so and you think, why would someone have data not in production? Well, you have data teams forming, and I've been helping a company like this where they've been starting their data stack off from scratch, and so none of that data is in production yet. No one's using it. Don't put data observability on it until you're ready to start making some of that production data. So that's the first place why you shouldn't do it. Secondly, I think even once a company has production data, you have that data is actually quite small. I don't think it's most of the time. And I think for most companies, a lot of the data they have is experimental or it's not in production right now. It might be an archive. So you don't put observability on that. So you kind of restrict the scope of where you apply data observability. And why else shouldn't you? No, I think that's it. I think if it's in production, you should probably have observability. I can't think of a good reason not to. If it's not in production, I would almost say you shouldn't have observability. Don't use it. Yeah.
So other considerations like team size, budget aren't really good decision.
No, I don't think team size and budget matters very much because as we've seen, right, we have customers with one or two people in the team, admittedly looking after a lot of data at the time, but you can also then have teams like 50, hundreds of data people. They also need it. I think it gets to a point where when you have such huge teams that they may decide to build their own thing, but I also think there's drawbacks to doing that. You end up having to look after something. And sorry, what was the other dimension other than team size?
Budget.
Budget. I think there's probably a tool or a tier of a product for any budget, really. Because like we have a free tier. So if you have that tiny data and your team is that small, you can probably live off that. But if you have a huge budget, there's other tools as well. I don't think budget's a massive concern because the market has choice, and including open source, right?
But Juan is, coming in with a no BS question as always, which everyone should check out his podcast. Hi Juan, yeah, but why doesn't budget matter? So if we go in a little bit on that, like let's say your mandate is to cut costs on the data team because the whole company is tightening the belt a little bit. Like, how would you justify making this investment? Which kind of ties into what Monica was saying. Like, how do you convince other stakeholders that the investment is worth it?
Yeah, and I think that comes back to it has to pay its way, right? I think you think about the cost of data engineers, right? Well, how much are you paying for a data engineer? Probably easily $100,000 to $150,000, right? That's like a low end mid data engineer salary, right? You, I don't think there's many data observability tools out there that cost that much. You know, you should be saving, even if it's only a fraction of one headcount's time, you should still be making a good return on investment, in all honesty. So I think the idea that, oh, let's save money by throwing away our tools, well, okay, well, we still have the problem. Who's going to fix it? Is that going to be a human? Are they going to do this manually each time? Well, you're not going to save money that way. That's just not how it works.
Got it. So it's less about like the cost doesn't matter and more about like the ROI is quite clear in your mind.
Okay, so put it this way: the cost of poor data quality is there. It's not going away, and so it's a case of how much do you trade off? Like, I'm gonna pay for tools to help me with that, or I'm gonna spend time building processes to help me with that, and that's an investment. But that should reduce the overall cost of having the poor data quality. And so there's always a trade-off. It's not like, oh, if I don't pay for this observability tool, that we'll just save the cost of that tool. No, there's other things to consider.
Makes sense. I think we have 4 minutes left and maybe two more questions. So I think you've been making the case that data observability should be on your priority list. And my question is, like, why now and not later? Like, data quality and data observability can often seem like the next quarter thing for the last 8 quarters. Like, why would you do it now?
So I've spoken to some data leaders, even like today, and they were saying, well, we haven't had things haven't broken yet, right? And part of me is like, I've been there when this broke, and then I bought a data observability tool. I've been there in a team before and leading that team, and I wish I didn't I wish I didn't like let it break, because fundamentally, if you work at a business where there's changing data structures, engineers shipping code every day or multiple times a day, something will break your data at some point, whether it was you or someone else. So so that's probably my argument. You want it now because you want to know when that issue is going to come. You don't want to know. You don't want to wait for it to break and have a big outage and pain and then pay for the thing, unless that's your way of justifying the budget. And then, yeah, okay, that's the way, right? So I guess some companies operate like that.
And Monica adds, or worse, it's broken and no one knows it. Wow, this
Exactly.
happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, holy moly. And one thing I would add to what you're saying is that you're right, like time and trust are so easy to lose and so hard to regain that
Yeah.
we like hopefully we're all in a situation that we can keep trust high and maintain it rather than try and build it from scratch, because that's
Yeah.
another tax on your time.
And that's the thing, like I feel as soon as I got that, as soon as I started using data observability in my role, I started realizing that democratizing it and allowing my stakeholders to see not all of the alerts, but some of the alerts for like key assets that they were interested in actually increased my own trust. Like the data team's trust was higher because we weren't that team that didn't that had to be told about a data issue by someone else. We were proactively monitoring, using a system and telling our stakeholders about possible problems. Um, I that's invaluable. That the trust is something that's so valuable to a data team.
And yeah, Yang points out, yeah, ROI, it all comes back to ROI, right? And speaking of which, we're approaching 30 minutes. I hope that these 30 minutes have been high ROI for all of you. If anyone has any questions, please DM us or anywhere, we'll find it. Gordon adds, yeah, data observability is scaffolding up the data governance. That is a great, Gordon is a wordsmith. The Rosetta Stone between okay, we will cite you on this. And just to wrap it up, David, what are you reading nowadays?
So I have a very long list of Substacks, but on a personal level, like just for fun, I'm reading something called Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson. I'm like 84% of the way through it, and I every time as I'm going through it, I'm realizing this is either a prophecy or has been made a prophecy because Silicon Valley decided to build everything that was in this book.
I didn't even know that you were reading that. Okay, we got to catch up on that
Yeah.
after the call. But thank you everyone for tuning in to the first edition and hopefully not the last edition. I know that there's a lot of threads that we can pull from here, especially when it comes to how you should implement data observability or how exactly it's different from other tools and processes you might be using within your data quality uh, tool set. But we'll leave it at that for now. Uh, Thank you, David, for the time. I learn from you every time.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, happy holidays. See you on the new year. Bye.
Bye.